Are you ready to add animals to your homestead this season? Before you make any decisions, you should take a step back and ask what should be added first. When it comes to animals, we have to realize that they require dedication, hard work, and planning. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through the ideas and the steps that you should be thinking about before adding animals, either which kind to be adding or even should you be adding animals yet. Let's get growing. Hello and welcome to the Pray Just Plant podcast, the show that talks about growing a garden, a homestead, a healthy family, and most importantly, growing closer to God. I'm your host, Crystal Media, owner of the Red Ridge Farm Homestead, where our mission is to help women of faith find the courage to grow healthy food for their family while building a closer relationship with our Lord and Savior. That's you. Don't let the world hold you back. Pray Just Plant. Hello, fellow growers. I want to welcome you to the Pray Just Plant podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Media, and today in season 13, episode 10, we're going to talk about animals on the homestead. And not just animals that you currently have. I'm talking to you that are thinking about adding animals and you're asking the question, what should you add first? Either what type of animal should you add first? Are you ready to add animals yet? Or better yet, what are the things you should be thinking about if you've already chosen your animal to being prepared for that animal? I do want to tell you here that before we dive into this topic, that this episode is part of the Purposeful Homestead stage of the Purposeful Growing Journey. What is the Purposeful Growing Journey? It is a journey of stages that I have seen other homesteaders go through, myself have gone through, and it's basically stages so that you as a new homesteader can say, okay, I need to do this first, then this next, and this last, or this again, or this again. Because a purposeful growing journey is 6 stages that take you through 1, the basics, just grow. What are your goals? How are you going to get started? You could be talking about goals even in your later years. I do that here at the homestead. I've been growing more than 20 years, but I still make new goals every year, and I sometimes change up the way that I make goals. The next is the purposeful kitchen. I really truly believe that every homestead, the heart of a growing journey is our kitchen. Because what is our journey? To create delicious food for our family. What do we do with the delicious food for our family? We cook it. So the purposeful kitchen is the next stage. Plus it's a place that you can start even before you start growing. The next is the purposeful home. This is where you're learning how to manage your home so that you can get out of your home and into the garden and onto your homestead and even finance these areas where we talk about budgets and being a homemaker and what all that entails. Next is the purposeful garden, where you're learning about growing a garden and soil health and even permaculture in your garden. That's what I teach here at the Pray Just Plant podcast. Next is a purposeful homestead, where I teach you about homestead design. We talk about animals like we're going to today and how we can incorporate permaculture through all of our things that we do on the homestead, and also how we can just move forward with raising animals on our property. The next and last stage is the purposeful life. This stage, though, it may be the last stage, but it is a stage that is ever expanding. What I mean by that is that even though I'm in 20 plus years of growing, I still go, like I said before, to the just grow stage. I'm learning new things in the kitchen. I'm learning new things in the homestead. And of course, I bring all of those things that I'm learning to you. But you do the same in the purposeful life. Another stage part of the purposeful life is if you are thinking about taking your homestead to the next development, is by creating a business from your homestead. And I discussed that as well in the purposeful life. So if you want to learn more about the purposeful growing journey, be sure to go to the link in the description below or the show notes. And that link is going to take you to a page that's going to walk you through what each step is, describes it, what the things you should be working on in each step, and the resources that I have to help you accomplish those things, as well as show you when you're ready to move on to the next step or stage. Again, we are talking about adding animals to your homestead. And the title of this podcast episode is Before You Add Animals to Your Homestead, Ask What Should You Add First. So we're going to be answering kind of the 3 questions of should I add animals? Am I ready to? What type of animal should I add first? Or if I already figured out what animal I have, what things do I need to add so that I can properly care for that animal? So let's get started. If you're thinking about adding chickens, I do want to say really quickly that I have a link below in the description, choosing a layer breed of chickens for your homestead. That is a great resource for that. If you are thinking about adding chickens, go ahead and go to that link too. And the first main topic that I want to talk to you about is assessing your land and its resources. When it comes to adding animals, you need to look at what land you already have available and the things that, one, you have on your land that can benefit your animal, but also how your animal can benefit your land. This is permaculture at the very simplest level. When we understand our land, when we look at it and we see either the curvature of our land, like the hills, or even the products that are growing on our land, and we assess those before we pick an animal or before we get an animal, we'll be able to better consider our choices when it comes to that animal. The best way for me to give you an example is to tell you a story. When we first started growing, we didn't think about this in the full capacity. When we first started thinking about adding animals to our property, we thought about what we want, not necessarily what our property needed or we had the resources for. But as we've grown in homesteading and learned more about permaculture, we've learned that we need to look at both things. We need to look at, which is my next main topic, considering what animals will benefit our homestead, as well as what our land will naturally support without a lot of work or brought in assets too. So when we first started growing, we had horses, we brought in chickens. These were very simple things, but we wanted to expand and we wanted to add more. We had to consider what resources we had with already having horses. I personally have always wanted a dairy cow. This was something that I thought would be great, having fresh raw milk for our family, growing boys. I just couldn't even think about how we could add a dairy cow because we didn't have the land resources with 3 horses. A dairy cow consumes a large amount of grass and needs a large amount of land and really needs a little bit more flatter land than we have. So a dairy cow just wasn't a solution. Now, I didn't give up on that. I didn't give up on creating or figuring out how we could get a dairy here on our homestead, but I moved forward with the idea of assessing our land first, and it has been so beneficial. So a few years ago, actually 14 years ago now, I can't believe it's been that long, we were living in a smaller trailer house, and then we decided to build a house on our property. In that, we had a lot of excavation work that occurred. We had a lot of digging and dirt work that really ripped up a lot of our property, and we struggled the next couple years with weeds. So when I reassessed our land and when I kept watching our land and learning about our land, I found that maybe the solution that we should go for was dairy goats. Now, my first question was, will my kids drink goat milk? Is that even possible? So I started buying goat milk. I started seeing if my kids enjoyed it. I started researching breeds. But the main reason we went for goats was because of these 2 main topics that I'm discussing with you. We assessed our land. We figured out that we do have a shortage of space. Goats don't need much space. Okay, so my land has what it needs to support goats. What resources does my land have? Well, it has lots of weeds that the horses aren't eating. And the next thing, would this animal, the dairy goats, benefit our homestead? Yes. They would benefit our homestead because they would eat the weeds that the horses wouldn't eat. They would also eat some of the scrub brush that we have here on the homestead. Living in Wyoming, we just have scrub brush. There's also sagebrush that we have here. The horses don't eat it. So if we want to use permaculture principles of knowing our land and using animals to benefit our land, then we could utilize goats because goats were a natural fit. So I want you to ask yourself those questions. And maybe you've already decided on an animal and that's great, but reassess that animal. And maybe it may not be you change animals, but maybe you change breed. because breed also can follow into this. There are certain breeds of pigs that, like for ourselves here, we have a Kune. She doesn't take much land. She doesn't take much resources. I can feed her grass and I can feed her hay because she's more of a grazing pig than having to put a lot of grain and bring in outer resources. So my farm, my homestead can support that pig. So even though I chose to do pigs, and maybe you've chose to do pigs ahead of time, and now you're thinking, well, I need to reassess my land. Maybe you need to also look at what type of breed could work better for your land than just pigs in general. That'll also help you pick a breed. So again, just to recap, make sure you are assessing your land and its resources before you're picking an animal, or even if you've picked an animal and you're going into your breed, and consider what animals will benefit your homestead. So the dairy goats benefit our homestead more than just I wanted goats, which it started there a little bit. I wanted goats. But when I calculated and looked at our land, looked at what we had as resources, looked at what we needed as a homestead, we needed a dairy animal, we needed something to clean up weeds, we needed another ruminant to help our grazing and help break up the monotonum or the monoculture of just having horses. We needed an animal that could be grown right alongside of horses that wouldn't transmit diseases. We needed an animal that would benefit us as well as give us milk. And the dairy goat was the perfect solution. And then when I went a little bit further and I went and researched dairy goats, then I said, okay, what are some other things that I want to pull from this animal? What are some other things that I want this animal to fulfill here on the homestead? I do want good tasting fresh milk. I don't want the milk to be goaty. I want it to be a good higher cream milk. And in that, if I do spend a little bit more money on getting better dairy goats and get a dairy goat that has a higher cream content or has a higher fat content, I may be able to sell goat milk to people because it is a better quality milk. So that has all come to fruition over the past, I've had goats now for 7 years. Amber is turning 10 this year, my first dairy goat that I bought. So I've had dairy goats here for a while, but they are continuing to benefit. Because another thing that they benefit is they've allowed us to also get calves each year because I have all this excess dairy milk. And because I chose a dairy goat that produces a higher content milk, I can easily feed that milk to bum calves that I can purchase from other ranches around us. And we are providing our own meat because yes, I wanted a dairy cow on our property because of the meat of the beef idea, but having them continuously on our property would have been draining and it would have been too much. But raising calves and then butchering them the next year and they go into our freezers every year has been a beneficial. Another thing is that the milk can be used to feed and supplement our chickens. The milk can be used to supplement our pig now. And one of the main reasons we have a pig is because we needed to have a place for all this milk to go to. So those are the two things that I want you to consider. And the other thing that I needed to consider, as well as with adding dairy goats, was that I needed to consider how much time that I could dedicate to that animal. Having a simple meat goat, I'm going to just talk about goats, dairy goats and meat goats separate just because it's in the same area, but you kind of get the idea. But having a meat goat, you go out maybe 30 minutes a day, feed the animal, water them, maybe brush them and clip their hooves every 6 weeks. But then in about 4 months, they're in your freezer. They're gone. So that's a lot easier dedication than a dairy animal. Where a dairy animal, like I've said, I've had them continuously for 7 years. I go out morning and night to milk. I also have all the other duties of washing and brushing and cleaning their goat pens and cleaning their goat barn that I would with the market goat animals. A dairy animal goes beyond that because not only do I need to milk twice a day, but I need to wash buckets and I need to figure out ways to use up all the milk. Knowing how much time you have to dedicate to your animal is also going to be important when you're deciding on how you're going to utilize that animal or how that animal is going to be utilized on your farm. So we could have easily just got meat goats because it would have done the same things, the two things that I talked about before. We would have had the right space for it. We would have had the right resources on our land, and it would have been a benefit to our homestead. But by adding that extra element of them being dairy goats, I also had to consider how much time I was willing to dedicate to these animals. The other thing that I want to talk about, and I'm sure you've probably already done this but I need to mention it, is you need to research care and feeding for each type of animal. Again, I'm going to talk about dairy goats or meat goats. They eat completely different. Meat goats usually have a more higher grain content, but that content is very quickly consumed, and then the animal is consumed and put in the freezer. But with a dairy animal, I have to think of not only her grain content that she's eating, I have to think of the forage that she's eating. Like right now in the winter, I'm supplementing with alfalfa because I need to keep their calcium and potassium up because we're getting less sunlight. I need to also keep them warm because not only are my dairy girls trying to stay warm in the middle of February, but they're also producing milk in the middle of February, so they're going to be eating more of that higher nutrient dense food. Market goats, on the other hand, if you're just purchasing the market goat in the spring, feeding it through the summer and never having to worry about winter care, that's an option. Now, are you going to be purchasing the breeding market goats? Then you're going to have to worry about them through the winter, and you're going to have to worry about them kidding, which I have to do with my dairy goats as well. I had to put the buck in with my girls in December. That means that I had to care for a buck for about 30 days additional beyond just my girls. I had to figure out the breeding program and learn about seed, and I have to learn how to teach young goats how to get on the stanchion and milk. So you need to research the care, because I think that connects with the previous topic of like, how much time do you have to dedicate to this? I know I'm talking about goats a lot, but I have understanding in that topic. But put this to any other animal as well. The same ideas, the same thought process that I'm going through here. When I researched either meat goats or dairy goats, either one was going to need to take pretty much some of the basic cares, but I also needed to research milk and what I was going to be doing with the milk and how I was going to be handling the milk, how I was going to build a stanchion, how I was going to do rotational grazing where I still needed to bring the girls in every night or go out and milk them every morning. I needed to figure out those different things for those type of animals. So you need to make sure that you're doing your research on how you're going to care for them and you're feeding for each of your animals, because knowing how you're going to be feeding your animals is going to help you in the area of how much will it cost. Because knowing how much your animals eat, knowing what kind of property that you have and how much your land can provide and how much you are going to have to provide out of your pocketbook. Because whenever I say that you have to outsource something, that means that you're buying that. So if you're having to buy alfalfa hay like we are, because we don't have the land to grow our own alfalfa hay, that is something I needed to consider when it came to raising dairy animals. Do we have the financial support for these animals? And that's going to all go through when you go through the 4 things that we just talked about. But I think there's one more that you need to think about before we wrap up this episode, and that is you need to consider what other infrastructures you're going to need. When we first started with goats, we started with meat goats because my kids wanted to raise some goats for 4-H, which was a great venture for them. And it got us into goats when we wanted to learn about goats, but it was a short window. We got them in April. They were gone off our property by August. It was a way that we could learn about goats and just build very simple infrastructure so we could even see if goats would work for us. As we decided we were going to expand, we needed more infrastructure besides a simple pen and a simple shelter. We now have, because of dairy, I needed a barn that I could go to when it was -20 outside and still milk my animals. I needed a barn that they could be in so that I could access them very easily and very readily when it was really cold and lots of snow on the ground. So did we have that right away? No, we didn't. We built as we needed to. But when you know ahead of time, then you can budget for it and you can plan for it and you can plan how you're going to breed, how you're going to develop your herd, if you're going to go in the herd point of view, and move forward. So knowing your infrastructure or knowing what you're going to need as an infrastructure for your animal is also going to be very beneficial. All of it is going to require dedication, hard work, and planning. So I just want you to take some time, go over these 5 basic ideas when considering your animals. So I'm going to go over them really quickly. Assess your land and its resources. How can this animal benefit your land, or how can your land benefit this animal? Do you have what it needs? Consider what animals will benefit your homestead. What animals currently can be beneficial to your homestead, as in support it, bring more abundance, encourage more things to grow, maybe get rid of weeds and encourage more grass. What can be a benefit? Or even in your home, what can be an addition? Maybe you're wanting to add pork. Maybe you're wanting to add dairy like I was. Consider how much time you can dedicate to it. Maybe adding goats is what you want to do, but then you realize, well, dairy goats take a lot of time. Maybe dairy isn't where I want to start. Maybe it's just with meat goats, and then we'll eventually get into dairy. We get all our infrastructure going. That's the 5th thing, right? Consider what other infrastructure you'll need to support your animals. And research, care, and feeding so that you know the cost. Not only like the cost of how much time, but you know the cost of what you're going to need to be doing and outsourcing to bring onto your property to take care of that animal. So I want to thank you for joining me here at the Pray to Plant podcast. If you're new here, I want to welcome you to the Red Ridge Farm Fellowship of Fellow Growers. And as always, don't let the world hold you back. Pray, just plant.